And for the valve adjustment, we're going to take the seat storage and the seat out as usual. To get access, we're going to remove this front cover here so that we can get to the valve cover. Take the valve cover off. We're adjusting the valves cold. Battery area cover has been removed. Front of the engine valve cover is now visible. In order to get this plastic cover off of the front, the two key points you need to release would be this locating tab on each side and then this tab right here. Once you've gotten those released, the others with a little bit of pressure should release, and then the bottom ones, as the cover rotates outwards like this, the bottom one should release automatically and open up the front of the engine area so that you can do the valve adjustment. Okay, these are all 10mm bolts on here, including the kind of acorn nuts on the pipe here. But I'm going to take this hose off. There's a little clip, spring clip. Take that hose off, take the bolts out. But the problem is this lower left, the lower left one down here is of course being blocked by plastic. And in order to get this plastic off, it's a whole convoluted process. Plastic bodywork is a headache on scooters and motorcycles. I've already loosened these with my ratchet. That one's a little bit tight. There we go. I was able to pull the plastic just back with my fingers enough and use my smaller fine-tooth ratchet with a smaller 1/4-inch drive socket. And that 10mm socket was able to just get in there with enough room to get to that bottom one. Right down here, which you can probably not see, but it's right there. Okay, the valve cover is loose on this tube device. I forget what they call it. Has to do with emissions, no doubt. But the whole valve cover is loose, including the tube which is attached to the valve cover. So we're just going to move that to the left out of the way, try and prop it out of the way as much as possible. There's 3 different size bolts holding the valve cover in. The 2 on the right side are the same size, the upper and lower. The longest bolt is in the top left, and then the mid-size is in the bottom left. So as you're looking at it, top left, top right, bottom right on here. Next, going to take this cover off. It's got some smaller, looks like maybe 8mm. Take that cover off so that we can position the engine appropriately. We want to make sure that both valves are loose, or the rocker arms, I should say. We want to make sure both rocker arms are loose. And again, for the cover, two different size bolts. You got a longer set and a shorter set. The longer ones go on the upper center bolt and then down by the dipstick. 2 shorter ones go in the other locations. So that center plastic nut here, that's going to be 14mm. And we're going to rotate clockwise. And then I'm going to check move the rocker arms, see if they're both loose. If they're not both loose, we'll rotate it again 360 degrees. Check the rocker arms again, and they should be both loose at that point. Removing the spark plug will make this a little bit easier. I do not have the spark plug removed at this point. So I can feel the engine coming up on compression. So I have my feeler gauge set, which is a full set. It's removable, the individual blades. They're all marked on the face with the sizes in both US measurement in thousandths of an inch and then in millimeters. I removed the 5/1000ths blade. There we go. So that's 5/1000ths of an inch. 0.127 millimeter. The idea in this case, because the setting I'm looking for is just slightly under 5/1000ths of an inch, I'm setting it so it's tight when I drag it between the rocker arm and the valve stem. It'll still go in, but it's tight. And that's what I want. I want a nice tight clamp on this 5/1000ths gauge here. So as long as I can get it in there and it's got a good resistance when I try and pull, I know I've got a good setting on that. You have to be careful when you tighten the lock nut here. It's going to have a tendency to tighten that center threaded adjuster. So you always have to double check after you've tightened the lock nut to make sure that that center adjuster has not tightened up even further. The top one's easy to get to. It's nice having the angled feeler gauge. And this is probably closer to a true 5/1000ths. And I can still get it in there a little more easily than the intake valve, which is on the top. This is the exhaust valve on the bottom. And they even label it here, E, on the assembly here. So this is the exhaust. You want the exhaust valve to be slightly on the loose side, meaning, you know, maybe 1/1000th or a 1/2 on the loose side. You don't want tight clearances on the exhaust valve because you can wind up burning the exhaust valve. The face of the exhaust valve, if it doesn't fully seat because the clearance is too tight here, will burn the edges of the valve and potentially cause you problems. So you want, if anything, the exhaust side to be just a hair slightly on the loose side. We're not talking much either, just a tiny bit. So I can tell the difference when I do the drag test with that feeler gauge. I can tell that there's a difference between the upper and the lower clamping pressure between these two. Now we rotated the engine so that there's movement. I can feel the movement when I move these. I can feel the up and down movement. There's space in there for me to get the feeler gauge in on both of these. If you can only move the one and not the other, you probably don't have the engine rotated to the proper position, which would be the power stroke, the piston at top dead center. Both valves would be fully closed, and thus the rocker arms themselves would be loose, in which case they both are in this case. So I know I'm in the proper position as far as being able to adjust those. There's no pressure on the valve stem at all on either of these. So I can get my feeler gauge in there and check the gap. So there you have it. That's the valve adjustment. Tighten the lock nuts And yeah, it's done. There's a gasket over here on this pipe fitting. Just make sure that gasket is in good condition and it's intact. Make sure your valve cover sealing surface is clean. Make sure your gasket is protruding above the surface of the aluminum. It hasn't flattened out completely with age. If it has, you could put RTV, high temp RTV that's oil resistant and gas resistant RTV around here on top of the gasket itself, if need be, if it's leaking on you. This is a very low mileage vehicle at this point. There you go, whopping 334 miles. So, but it is 10 years old, so that has been clamped in place for 10 years. So, but it still is protruding above the surface of the aluminum on the valve cover. So we'll put it all back together. Anyway, gonna button it up, and that'll be it for today. Hey, thanks for watching.